All right, who's ready for a story? Well, ready or not, here it comes. Today you're going to be hearing the epic story, myth version of the Trojan War, written by Homer, not Simpson, from ancient Greece. If you ever get confused as you're listening to this, that's why there's that character chart that you can refer to as the story's going along. So let's get right into it with the introduction. Troy was a wealthy city on the eastern side of the Aegean Sea in Asia Minor and what is today Turkey. Troy was large, beautiful, and fortified by strong high walls and towers and massive gates at its entrance. Troy was a citadel or fortress. Now, just to remind you where Troy is, it's right over here in what is today Turkey, and then there's Greece. Okay. In about 1200 BCE, Troy was governed by King Priam and his noble wife Hecuba. These two had a fondness for children. It is said they had more than 50. Whoa! Now, before we go there, they adopted lots of kids. Had to say it. Okay. Their firstborn son was named Hector, and a later son was Paris. These two men played important roles in the Trojan War. This war between the Mycenaeans and the Trojans lasted 10 long years and has become a legend. About 400 years later, Homer wrote a long poem or epic about part of this war, known as the Iliad, and here we go with part one, the birth of Paris. The night before Paris was born, his mother was cursed with terrible dreams. In her dreams, she saw the birth of her son, but instead of a fine, healthy boy, she gave birth to a flaming torch. This flaming torch burned with a vengeance, engulfing and destroying Troy. When Hecuba recounted her dreams to her husband, he decided to consult the prophets or wise men of the city. They believed the dreams were an omen of the future and instructed the king to have the baby killed at birth to prevent this preordained destruction of Troy. Distraught, the king knew he had to follow the advice of the prophets, but couldn't face killing his own son. Instead, he gave the job to Agillos, his chief herdsman. He told Agillos to take the baby away and bring back his tongue as proof of his death. The herdsman obeyed his king, and when Paris was born, Agillos quickly took him to the mountains of Troy. However, Paris was an exceptionally beautiful child, and once on the mountain, Agillos couldn't bring himself to kill him. He decided to leave the baby on the slopes of the mountain where he was certain to be killed by wild animals. Agillos returned to the spot the next day. To his surprise, baby Paris was alive and well and being cared for by a family of bears. Agillos believed that this was truly a sign from the gods, and he refused to kill the baby. In order to appease King Priam, he found a wild dog, killed it, and cut out its tongue to present to the king. Once the king was convinced that Paris was dead, Agillos took Paris to secretly raise as his own son. He taught him to hunt and tend herds on mountain slopes. Paris was strong and healthy and grew into a strikingly handsome yet humble young man. Now, when I get to the end of each part, I'm going to give you the long story short recap in case you're confused. So, Queen Hecuba, King Priam, King and Queen of Troy. She's about to have another baby. I guess child 51. So she has this horrible dream that her baby is going to lead to the destruction of the city. So they consult the wise men, and the wise men are like, when the baby's born, kill the baby. So the king and queen are like, we can't kill our own child. Like, we're not going to do that. But they have no problem telling somebody that works for them, kill the baby. So Agillos is like, well, I'm not going to kill the baby in front of everybody. I'm going to take it to the mountains because, like, that's an image people would not be able to unsee. And he's like, man, I can't be a baby killer. And he gets this idea. He's going to leave the baby on the mountain, come back the next day. The baby's definitely going to be dead because it's a baby. The cold, the animals, anything. So when he comes the next day, there's baby Paris chilling with bears. So he's like, this must be a sign from the gods that this baby has to live. He shows the king and queen a fake tongue, why he had to present like a receipt for killing the baby, I have no idea. So the poor wild dog he finds that kills it to get its tongue, that's just a tragedy in itself. So now he's secretly raising Paris as his own son, and Queen Hecuba and King Priam think Paris is dead. Time jump. So now, 20 years in the future, in Greece, we get to part 2. So, back in Greece, King Pelias was taking Thetis the sea nymph as his bride. It was a magnificent wedding under the golden light of the full moon. Stars glimmered in the deep blue sky like sparkling confetti, and a ring of shining torches glowed where they hung among the olive branches. Since Pelias and Thetis were prominent figures, both gods and mortals attended the grand wedding feast. The many guests strolled and mingled outdoors while 9 muses serenaded the wedding party with their magical music. For the moment, peace reigned. Pelias and Thetis were in love. However, not everyone was pleased. The goddess of strife and discord, basically the goddess of jealousy and making problems, Eris, is jealous and angry because she had not been invited to the wedding. She decided to go anyway. When she appeared, the music stopped and everyone turned to stare at the unwelcome guest. In her hand, Eris held a beautiful golden apple. She lifted the apple aloft and then, with a shrill and piercing laugh, she tossed it onto the ground. It rolled around, winding its way through the crowd until it stopped at the feet of the 3 most powerful goddesses: Athena, goddess of wisdom; Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty; and Hera, queen of the gods and wife to Zeus. When the crowd looked back to Eris for an explanation, she was gone. King Pelias walked over and bent to pick up the apple. "Is it a present for us?" the goddesses asked, for they were quite vain. King Pelias reached for the beautiful fruit, but as soon as he touched it, a cold chill ran down his spine. "How mysterious," said Athena. "What do you think it means?" King Pelias turned the apple over in his hands and discovered a small inscription that read, "To the fairest." The goddesses began to question the king. "Well, to whom shall you give it? It's obviously intended for one of us." The crowd formed a large circle and chattered amongst themselves, speculating about what to do. King Pelias was now distraught on this most happy and cherished day. He grew silent and still, unable to act. Then Zeus, king of the gods, broke through the circle. "Tonight is not the time to decide who gets the apple. We are here to celebrate a wedding. Let us get on with the feast." The 3 goddesses began to bicker and argue amongst themselves about who was the fairest and who should get the apple. Finally, Zeus could take it no longer. He interrupted them and proclaimed, "Paris, the true son of King Priam of Troy, will be the fair judge. It will be up to him to decide who gets the golden apple." He then took the apple from Pelias and stepped back, but the happy atmosphere of the wedding had been lost. Clouds covered the moon, and it grew cold. So, part 2, there's this wedding, and Pelias and Thetis don't invite Eris, the goddess of jealousy and troublemaking, so she's a wedding crasher. And it's like the music's pumping, everybody's dancing, and then you know that sound when like the DJ scratches a record. That's kind of what happens there. So all of a sudden she just drops this golden apple that says, "To the fairest." Now here's the DJ scratch. Let's see if this works. Like that. So it's a big controversy because Aphrodite and Athena and Hera are all like, "Well, this is for me because I'm the best, I'm the fairest." And they're arguing so much, Zeus is like, "You know what? Random decision. Paris, somebody that none of you know, he is going to decide who gets this apple. Done. Back to partying." Here we go. Part 3. The Judgment of Paris. As dawn broke after the marriage of King Pelias, I said that wrong. As dawn broke after the marriage of King Pelias, Zeus and the other gods returned to Mount Olympus. Zeus sent for his trusted messenger Hermes with the swift and winged feet. He instructed Hermes to accompany Athena, goddess of wisdom, Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, and Hera, Zeus's wife and queen of all the gods, to find Paris so he could make the faithful decision about the golden apple. Hermes flew along the Trojan coastline in search of Paris. He found the young man tending his flock. When Paris saw Hermes and the three goddesses, he began to run away. Hermes called out to him, "Do not fear what you see, herdsman Paris, for you have been chosen by Zeus, Lord of Olympus, to perform a great task. He has sent me here with these three goddesses, for he knows of your courage and fairness of judgment." Paris was scared, but also a bit intrigued. Hermes and the goddesses approached Paris and presented him with the golden apple. They showed him the inscription and described the scene at the wedding. Hermes told him that it was Zeus's wish that he alone decide who should receive the coveted golden apple. Paris read the inscription aloud, "To the fairest," and looked into the eager faces of the goddesses awaiting his decision. The magnitude of his task began to sink in. Pulling Hermes aside, Paris confessed that he was frightened to make such a bold decision because one goddess was as fair as the other. After all, he was only a mortal. How could he escape the vengeance of the two goddesses who were not chosen? Hermes comforted Paris and promised that they would all abide by his decision because it was the will of Zeus. The three goddesses stepped forward and agreed with Hermes. Hera was the first to speak on her behalf. "Choose me, gallant Paris, and you shall have powers far greater than that of any king. I will make you lord of all Asia and Greece." Paris thought about how his life would be different to be such a king. Perhaps his destiny was not that of a herdsman after all. Athena broke the spell. "Power is good, fair Paris, yet what good is power without the wisdom to wield it properly? I will give you wisdom. You will be the wisest man on earth, and everyone will seek you for your advice. It is with this knowledge that you will gain power, for you will be able to get anything your heart desires." Paris thought being the wisest man in the world seemed much better than being a king. Then beautiful Aphrodite looked deep into Paris's soul to find what he truly desired. She spoke with words like music. "Dear Paris, knowledge and power cannot give you what your lonely heart desires. They cannot give you love. If you choose me as the fairest, I will give you the most beautiful woman upon the earth to be your bride. Her name is Helen of Sparta." Paris's heart skipped a beat because this was the best offer of all. He immediately handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, who laughed triumphantly and promised to lead Paris to Helen in Greece. Athena and Hera refused to accept this decision, believing that Paris had not judged fairly. They accused him of deciding on the basis of his own desires rather than who was truly the fairest. They stormed away angrily and vowed revenge. So, Hermes leads the goddesses to Paris and says, "You gotta pick who's the fairest." Paris is like, "The other two are gonna get mad at me." And Hermes is like, no, they all agreed they're going to abide by the decision. But then they all try and bribe him. So Hera is like, "I'll make you the most powerful man on earth." Athena is like, "I'll make you the smartest man on earth." Aphrodite's like, "I'll set you up with a hot woman." And Paris is like, "Deal, hot woman, I choose that one." And obviously, Athena and Hera are like, "You didn't really answer the question. You just picked who gave you the best deal," even though they tried to bribe him themselves. So here we go. Part 4, Paris returns to Troy. So here we go. Now that Aphrodite had promised Helen of Sparta would become Paris's wife, she told Paris that he would need to perform some deeds to prove that he was worthy. She also told him Helen was already married, information he could have used before making his decision. She said Helen is the most beautiful and heavily guarded mortal in the world. King Menelaus, her husband, is very protective and jealous. Even if you do manage to steal her away, how do you expect to win her heart? Paris understood his predicament. First, Paris had to become famous. Aphrodite told him that only someone famous could meet Helen, the Queen of Sparta, so he had to do something to make a name for himself. It so happened that King Priam was sponsoring a competition inside the walls of Troy. A prize bowl would be awarded to the man who could win the set of challenges. The winner would surely get the notoriety that Paris needed. Paris begged his father Agilus to let him enter the competition. Agilus was torn. He knew that his son was really the son of the king and most able of all men in Troy. This meant that Paris would most likely win the competition, but it also meant that he might lose his adopted son forever. Eventually, Agilus agreed and escorted Paris into the walled city. Paris had never been inside Troy before. He was excited and awed as he joined the other men who were competing. Even Hector and Deiphobus, King Priam's other sons, had entered the competition, sure that they would be victorious. Paris's strength and cunning overcame all the obstacles, and he was declared the winner. King Priam's other sons refused to admit defeat, and at the end of the day, when Paris was presented the prize bull, the two drew their swords and prepared to slay him. Quickly, King Agilus leapt in front of Paris and pleaded with the king, "Please, my lord, I beg you, do not let them kill this youth, for he is your true son, Paris." Gasp! This is like the moment where it's like, goes over the crowd. Dramatic moment there. King Priam and Hecuba were overwhelmed. They welcomed Paris back into their family and proposed that he live with them in Troy as a prince. Eventually, his brothers accepted him also, but their sister Cassandra did not welcome Paris at all. She was a prophetess and understood the disaster that was imminent now that Paris was back. She pleaded with her father to kill Paris, warning him that doom would surely befall Troy if Paris were allowed to live. King Priam only smiled and said, "It is better that Troy should fall than I should lose this wonderful new son of mine." All right, so step one on how to get your girl, Helen, is become famous. So Paris enters this competition, wins. Hector and Deiphobus are sore losers. They're about to kill him when Agilus reveals, "You can't. This is Paris, that baby I was supposed to kill all those years ago, and I didn't." Gasp. So they actually accept Paris into the family, and everyone is kind of like, all right, cool, new family member. But Cassandra, one of the children, is like, "Hello, am I the only one that remembers the prophecy that if this person lives, the city is going to be destroyed?" And everyone's like, "You know what? We don't care. We like Paris." So there we go. All right, part 5, Paris and Helen. Here we go. Paris, now a prince, because he's accepted in the royal family, was eager to claim Helen as his bride. With the help of Aphrodite, he sailed across the Aegean Sea to Sparta. He came ashore with great tributes, tricking King Menelaus into believing he was on a goodwill mission from his father. Helen and Paris spent much time together during his stay at the palace, and she fell in love with him. Aphrodite assured Paris that they would have a beautiful future together, free from revenge. One night, Paris stole Helen away and sailed back to Troy. During the voyage, Hera created a great storm, determined to destroy them, but they managed to sail through safely to Troy. The moment the Trojans laid eyes upon Helen, they fell in love and worshipped her as their queen. Back in Greece, King Menelaus was filled with rage to find his wife gone. With the help of his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, Menelaus raised an army larger than any before. Then they set out to conquer Troy and reclaim Helen. So, Paris meets Helen. They hit it off. Helen doesn't like her husband Menelaus. She's looking for a reason to leave, and Paris is that reason. So, they leave Sparta. They sail for Troy. Menelaus is furious that his wife has left him for a Trojan prince. So he talks to his brother, who's the king of the Mycenaeans, and Menelaus is king of Sparta, and they get together with a whole bunch of Greek city-states, and they say, "This is war on Troy. We need to get Helen back." Now, in mythology, Helen is known as the face that launched 1,000 ships because there's this massive military effort to try and get Helen back. Now, part 6, the birth of Achilles. He's way famous, so here we go. Now, while Paris was in Sparta winning Helen, King Pelias and Thetus were having problems of their own. They're the ones that got married with the golden apple thing. After the incident with the golden apple, the couple lived happily for a while with their family of daughters. But as the years passed, King Pelias grew more and more dejected, for although Thetis had given birth to 6 sons, each one had mysteriously died in infancy. Thetis was despondent over the death of her baby sons. She secretly longed to return to the sea in the comfort of the waves. She no longer wanted to be a queen. She wanted the simple life of a sea nymph once more. But as fate would have it, she had a 7th son, whom they named Achilles. Determined not to lose this son, Thetis secretly vowed to make Achilles invulnerable. There is a way to make someone immortal. One must be washed in the water of the river Styx and then dried in a fire. Without telling her husband, she took Achilles into the underworld of the god Hades and dipped the baby in the river Styx. The river was swift, and Thetis did not want to lose her baby, so she held him tightly by one heel. The magical protecting waters washed all over Achilles except for the heel that his mother held. Upon learning that Thetis had gone, King Pelias was distraught and suspicious. His wife had been acting strangely, and he was concerned for Achilles' safety. He was relieved when his wife and son returned unharmed, but was determined. Thank you, Google. Was determined, typo, to keep a watchful eye on them. That night, as Pelias pretended to be asleep, he saw Thetis remove Achilles from his cradle and place him in the fire that warmed their chambers. He quickly lunged out of bed and grabbed the baby out of the flames. "You fool!" cried Thetis. "Had you left Achilles in the flames, he would have become immortal. He has been dipped in the river Styx and is invulnerable to fire." Now, so let me explain all this. So, Pelias and Thetis having some issues. Every time they have a son, the son ends up dead. So Thetis, the problem with this marriage right here is communication, because they're not talking to each other, as you can tell well, because Thetis doesn't tell her husband, but she's a sea nymph, so she can travel rivers. So she gets to the river Styx, dips him in there, holding him by the heel, almost like you're dipping a chip in dip. However, you can't double dip. It washes over Achilles. But then what she does, like the second part is it's got to dry in the fire. And she doesn't tell her husband any of this. And while that's happening, her husband, Pelias, sees baby Achilles in the fire and thinks, my wife is a murderer. She's been killing all the sons. And he takes baby Achilles out of the fire. And Thetis is like, you fool. I was making him immortal. And now it didn't work. The problem there, communication. All right, part 7. Achilles grows up.